legislative side of this issue for whether the government should implement new infrastructure for self-driving cars. I'm going to first touch base on privacy concerns. Our private information is not safe. In an article written by Greg Silberg called Are We Ready? New threats to personal privacy. Even now with persuasive connectivity in and outside of our vehicles, we are finding it increasingly difficult to preserve our privacy as the use of autonomous and connected vehicle solutions expands. Maintaining individual privacy within the transportation system may become even more arduous. Although the increased use of sensing, tracking, and real-time behavior evaluation creates new privacy issues as well as ethics and policy dilemmas. The benefits to be derived from vehicle sensor and communication technologies make them an appealing pursuit for most stakeholders. Privacy concerns must be resolved and enabled to deployment of integrated sensor-based and cooperative vehicle technologies. A balance between privacy protection interests and other affected interests is essential to resolve conflicts between the stakeholders who will make decisions about how information is collected, archived, and distributed. Potential stakeholder concerns are numerous. Disclosure of vehicle data could reveal trade secrets. Public personalities such as politicians and celebrities could be connected to potentially embarrassing locations or routes, and ordinary citizens could find themselves spammed or stalked as the data enabled a variety of harmful applications such as commercial misuse, public corruption, and identity theft. And what's to prevent nefarious governments from using the expanded surveillance capabilities to spy on their citizens? The next claim I'm going to talk about is whether self-driving cars will basically cause a loss in jobs. In an article called A Self-Driving Future by Sightline Daily, Fred Andersky, who's the Director of Government and Industry Affairs for Bendix Commercial Vehicle Systems, says the policy implications around autonomous vehicles and their impact on truck drivers, taxi drivers, package delivery drivers, bus drivers, chauffeurs, etc. are pretty broad. Andersky says, I would have to think that any legislation or regulation around autonomous vehicles would have to take this implication into consideration, meaning there could be requirements that, like pilots in airplanes, will see a need to keep a driver behind the wheel for a long time, not necessarily because he or she needs to be there, but because there's not another job to move into or to help ease the transition into other careers. So, continuing on to job losses, by Tom Morstaw, an article that was written by Tom Morstaw called What's the Biggest Obstacle to Google's Driverless Cars? Maybe the taxi drivers. He quotes, this entirely destroys the taxi business, of course, or at least it entirely destroys the business of driving a taxi. Or if the streets are full of cars without drivers that can be hired by the minute of an hour, or the hour, or the trip, then what need is there for anyone to actually be driving such a vehicle, says Andersky. So I'm going to move on to insurance companies will be affected. In an article called Driverless Cars Are Going to Kill Insurance Companies, I found this article on Motherboard. Other auto insurers would eventually see something like 90% of premiums disappear. Health insurers would also have to give up revenue as car-related injuries plummeted. Governments would lose fines because cars would obey all traffic laws, but police forces would need fewer officers on the road, and prisons would need less capacity as drunk drivers kept their freedom. Utilities would lose revenue because traffic lights would no longer be needed, and highways and streets wouldn't need to be lit. After all, the cars can see in the dark. Parking lots, which cover a third of the ground in some cities, would pretty much disappear while freeing land and reducing property values, and so on. Now I'm going to discuss safety. I think that there's going to be less safety on the streets due to the autonomous car idea and sensor, because it's going to be dependable on sensors. Anderson also quotes in Sidewide Navigation, he says that researchers say there are also a number of issues that car manufacturers and policymakers will have to work through before the widespread use of driverless vehicles becomes common. While technology can sense and react quicker than humans, it is not good at interpreting data. For example, is that object in the roadway signage vary across the U.S.? Will a vehicle be able to perform in dry, flat climate as well as sensory, as well as a snowy one with hills? So it goes to say that they haven't tested the vehicles completely in different weather conditions, with like heavy rainstorms in different nations across the U.S., different states. They haven't tested it on icy grounds. So basically, but I'm going to go on to the next claim. We cannot depend on car sensors. By Anderson Priddle. Google's prototype self-driving cars to be built in Metro Detroit. It is very risky, he quotes, to allow complete relaxation for passengers in the vehicle. They need to be alert in case something possibly goes wrong. What if the brakes didn't automatically stop at a crosswalk and the pedestrian was struck? Then what? There are so many risks involved that leaving the self-driving car on its own is not reliable. Nothing is guaranteed, and you have to know how to take action if need be, says Risk. So the next 2 points I'm going to point out are related to to the infrastructure. I think it's going to affect our infrastructure. Also, an article I found on Daily says, but what if we are only a decade away from being able to cheaply add self-driving navigation to any vehicle on the demand automated car services steadily take off? If that happens, today's car's first development policies will have been catastrophically wasteful. For example, if fleets of self-driving vehicles take hold, ubiquitous local laws that require each building to have its own oversupply of free parking will have wasted billions of dollars in vast acreages of urban land. Just so in a future with fewer vehicles traveling through the system more efficiently, committing ourselves to multi-billion-dollar roadway expansions is an enormous mistake. Buildings, parking garages, and highways are 100-year decisions. There is a built-in inefficiency with mass motoring, where every adult owns an expensive space, consuming a piece of capital equipment that sits idle 95% of the time. Our grandchildren may look back at this era as a short-term aberration solved by technology. I think that the last thing I'm going to touch base on is self-driving cars will pose a threat to electronic security. An article by the World-Class Factbook U.S. Central Intelligence Agency says, transportation policymakers, auto manufacturers, and future automated vehicle drivers often worry about electronic security. Computer hackers, disgruntled employees, terrorist organizations, and/or hostile nations may target the atomic vehicles and intelligent transportation systems. Lastly, more generally, causing collisions and traffic disruptions. As one worst-case scenario, a two-stage computer virus could be programmed to first disseminate a doormat program across vehicles over a week-long period, infecting virtually the entire U.S. fleet, and then cause all U.S. AVs to simultaneously speed up to 70 miles per hour and veer left. Since each atomic vehicle in the fleet represents an access point into such systems, it may be infeasible to create a system that is completely secure. Thank you.